Good morning, everyone. My name's Andy. Disclaimer, first of all, I actually probably wrote some of that Perl code, which is still hanging around at REA, so I do apologise. My background is actually as a software developer. Spent a number of years at REA Group and various other businesses around Melbourne and around Asia and Europe and a bunch of other places. Now I'm at Wesfarmers OneDigital, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer for OnePass. I will explain what OnePass is, because that's kind of pivotal to the story that I'm going to tell today. It's quite possible, unless you're a kind of keen watcher of the stock market or in the retail industry, that you don't actually know who Wesfarmers is. Clicky thing's not working. Do I need to turn that on? Nope. I don't have a keyboard either. Maybe I can click this. Nope. There we go.
Oh, there's supposed to be.
There we go.
Here we go.
Different one.
I think that needs to be plugged
Okay.
in.
So while you're doing that, I'll tell you about Wesfarmers. So you probably don't know, may not know who Wesfarmers are, but you probably know some of our brands. So Bunnings, Kmart, Target, Catch, Officeworks. So big Australian business, and actually dates back to 1914 as the Westralian Farmers Cooperative. So this is some of the things that we used to do back in the day. I'm pleased to tell you we don't do calf dehorner anymore, as far as I know, anyway. And also, you may not know that Perth's first radio station, 6WF, was launched by the Westralian Farmers Cooperative. So that's now ABC Perth. So very well embedded, certainly in the fabric of Western Australia. So since then, Wesfarmers has grown into one of Australia's biggest businesses. So lots of different things in the portfolio. I've talked about the retail businesses, but there's also interests in chemicals, energy, fertilisers, industrial products, safety products. It's a very diverse group. But most people in Australia probably do know us best for our retail brands. So across the whole group, got about 120,000 team members. Over 1,000 of those are in roles within data and digital. And in the retail businesses, we have stores, I think about 1,800 stores across Australia and New Zealand. And in the financial year up to June of this year, reported about $29 billion in sales. So pretty big group. And then there's us in OneDigital, and we're new. So we only really came into being officially in July this year as we became a division. But there's a history of a number of the bits of the division which came together. So back in June of 2021, our managing director stood up at our strategy day and talked about the desire to build a data and digital ecosystem and investing at that time $100 million into that. So that was a very bold statement that we're going to do that. At the time he said this, so the idea is to leverage scale and unique assets, including trusted brands, leaders on value, the store networks and our team, and the aim is to enhance the customer experience and make it easier to shop across multiple Wesfarmers brands. So that was June 2021, and the idea was that we were going to bring together various different assets within the group and put those to work. So part of that strategy was to build a subscription program, and that's what we're talking about today, is OnePass. So OnePass is a subscription program for the retail businesses within Wesfarmers. So the proposition is it's $4 a month. You get free delivery on eligible items across Kmart, Target and Catch, with more to come. Watch this space. And also other benefits, single sign-on, all in one account. So that's what OnePass is. And we're a product within the Wesfarmers OneDigital organisation. So today, what I'm going to talk you through is a few areas. So I'm going to give you a bit of background on the architecture, some of the considerations that we had as we were building this thing out, a little bit about the solution we chose, tell you about growing that and the impact around onboarding new divisions, talk a bit about end-to-end testing and how we've adopted Pact, and we'll also have a little bit of a discussion around trade-offs. So for us, a lot of this was all about speed to market. So with the June 2021 announcement, it was all about how quickly can we get this out. So I'll talk to you a little bit about, I suppose, some of the constraints around us and how the group is organized and how that impacted our thinking as we came to building OnePass. So Wesfarmers, as I mentioned, big conglomerate business. One of the key things about Wesfarmers is divisional autonomy is a very key concept. And so this is really central to how the business operates. It talks about the ability for each of our divisions, be they retail or other, to set their own strategies, to set their own roadmaps, and to reach their targets. So this provides a high degree of ability for those businesses to meet their goals, gives them agility, and gives them the ability to set their own agenda. So it's a key part of how Wesfarmers operates. What that means from a technology point of view is that each of those businesses have built their own technology stacks over the years, which are fit for purpose for the business that they're in. And in some cases, there's crossover. In other cases, there may be differences. And this was acknowledged by Rob when he stood up 2021. And in that announcement about a data and digital ecosystem, he said that the approach to ecosystem development will ensure that each division retains their own customer data and digital capabilities to support their future success consistent with divisional autonomy. So OneDigital is not about replacing capability, it's about adding new layers on top of the existing divisions. So what that means for us as we go into building this is we've got to consider different technology platforms. So kind of logical architecture of how this all comes together. On the, get my directions right-hand side there, you've got OnePass. And within OnePass, there's a number of things we've needed to build, right? So we've needed to build things around accounts and identity management, build things around managing subscriptions, so plans and billing, marketing technology so we can actually talk to customers, benefits and making sure that people are entitled to benefits and the offers that are available. And then that's underpinned, obviously, by a data layer. There's the customer experience layer on top. And then we also have a shared data asset, which lives under our OneData business unit. And then on the left-hand side there, you've got each of our retail divisions, or certainly the ones which we've launched with, so Kmart, Catch, and Target. And they've got identity platforms, they've got commerce platforms, and they've got a bunch of other systems as well if they're a physical store as well, point of sale and ERPs and everything else. But here we're thinking about particularly the identity and the commerce platform in the online world. So when you think about it, when we've got to integrate with these platforms which are potentially different across the divisions, you need to think about how you're going to do that. So there's multiple different ways we could do that. We could do a very tight coupling approach and do one-to-one integrations. We could use a whole bunch of different platforms. And what we decided to do as an approach was to go with a loosely coupled approach. That was really important for us to maintain that divisional autonomy. And actually, early on, we developed some architectural principles. So the first of those is kind of key here to this discussion, which is around minimize coupling between divisions and OnePass to maximize divisional autonomy. So we actually think of it almost like a black box. Like we think of ourselves essentially as a software as a service provider, and we shouldn't need to know the implementation details about each of the divisions and how they go about it. That loose coupling is really important to us. So those are some of the architectural kind of background to how we went about doing this. I'll now talk you through a somewhat detailed view of the solution. I did simplify this next slide, just disclaimer, but it's still fairly busy in terms of the solution. And it's probably not accurate today as well, because it was from a few iterations ago. So this is kind of the solution on a page. But the key layer there is those grey boxes in the middle. So we're an event-driven system. So we've got a bunch of different systems, so subscription and account and so on. And they are emitting events, and we use Kafka internally to handle those events, and so people can subscribe to those, consume those, so in the data platform, in other platforms. So we could have potentially just said, well, we've got Kafka, we're using that internally to communicate. We'll just extend that out, and each of the divisions can also listen for the events that are important to them. And that probably would have been fine, but it thinks about the today and not necessarily the tomorrow. Because what we're building is not just what have we got today and the launch partners that we've worked with, it's also about who's coming on down the track. And in that mold of thinking around being a black box, being a software as a service provider, it probably wasn't the right choice for us. So we ended up with HTTP JSON APIs to discuss with the divisions, and that's how we built out our solution, to use that as our primary mechanism for communication with each of the divisions. So that gives us a level of ability to be technology agnostic. And it's also worth pointing out that that's not the only APIs we have in there. So, kind of obviously there's the HTTP JSON APIs, which are, essentially public-facing. We've got the internal Kafka. We also have GraphQL APIs in there, so our front-end systems are talking to the back-end. We implemented a back-end for front-end pattern, BFF. So essentially, if you don't know what that is, that's aggregating together potentially different systems into a single view for the front-end systems to be able to consume. We could have used GraphQL potentially as our external API layer, but again, it kind of assumed that there was a certain level of capability which we didn't know would be there. Whereas, not to denigrate them, but HTTP JSON API is kind of lowest common denominator really in terms of capability for people to consume that. So as you can imagine, building this across 3 different sites was a pretty big effort. So kind of success, hooray. So we went live. Well, we did an internal pilot within about 9 months, so with team members, launched into the market May of this year. You can see there just a little bit of the coverage. And so far, results have been very good. We've been very happy with both the uptake from consumers, but also how the platform has gone since we've launched. And probably the key thing that we've found is also the success of that approach of loose coupling, the black box thinking, and how that has impacted on new divisions as they come on board. So as I mentioned before, we launched with Kmart Target Catch. It was made public earlier this year that also Bunnings and Officeworks will be joining the platform within this financial year, without giving too much away. And so as we onboard those new partners, we were really able to start stress testing the way and the architecture that we put together in the solution. So far it's been going well, so onboarding those new partners. One of the things which we did do as part of that was to build out a partner portal. So because all of our APIs are using the open API spec, we were able to auto-generate the documentation. So our partner portal covers information about OnePass as a program. It talks about some of the architecture, but it has this API documentation. So as new partners are coming on, this is their source of truth for what do I need to know about the APIs. As you'd expect, it gives them the ability to trial those as well. And so that's been a really important part of how we've gone about working with partners as well. So the main time required for us in that case is, obviously some support as we go through that, and essentially an account management view of how we work with a new division, but also the time that we then need to update web assets and so on, add new logos, and the go-to-market approach. The other thing we do a fair bit, of course, is end-to-end testing as a new division comes on board, making sure that the whole thing works end-to-end. And actually, end-to-end testing is something which we're doing a fair amount of work on at the moment. So we've got a big process of being able to shift quality left and get more of that end-to-end testing happening earlier on in the cycle. So, and this is where Pact comes in. So hopefully some of you will be familiar with Pact. If you didn't go to Matt Fallow's talk yesterday, definitely recommend looking it up after the conference. There's a lot to learn there about that approach of contract-based testing. This is again, stole it off our wiki view of Pact and how it sits within OnePass. So essentially, the Pact system means that we've got consumers who are in the divisions, and then us as a provider of the APIs. So we have an example consumer, and that's where we build our tests against. And then the providers use a stubbed version of us as a provider to mimic the actual behavior of that. And then it all sits there with the Pact broker in the middle, which manages those contracts so that when we're testing things, when we're releasing new changes to the APIs, the main idea is that a consumer of that API has sent us a test which has the expectations of the APIs, and then we know that if we've broken that API, we're no longer conforming to the contract, that there's an issue. So what that means for us is we can automate a lot of that back and forth between the divisions and ourselves, and that saves us, A, a lot of time, but B, also people having to do those things manually. So, as I mentioned kind of earlier on, speed to market for us is really, really important as part of this. And, kind of thinking back to Alison's talk, that kind of short-term thinking, long-term thinking. And for us, we've got to be able to balance both of those. So, in the architecture, we've thought about long-term, what does this mean in terms of bringing on new platforms, new providers, new partners? But obviously, short-term, we've got to also get something into market, and there's no point building the amazing solution which is going to do everything and then putting it out to market and realizing that it may not be what the customer wants. So there's also certainly an element of trade-offs that you need to make as you go through this. So one of the key trade-offs for us is thinking about new use cases and new ways that people might be using the platform and building the underlying infrastructure for that. So one example is one that's lovingly referred to internally as ADR3. I see a wry smile from a couple of people from the team. So ADR in this context is an architecture decision record. So it's basically once an architecture decision gets made, we document that. And it talks about the trade-offs and what we considered. And 3 is the index number. So you can see it was a pretty early decision for us. To give it its full title, now let's see if I've got to do this justice. So it's the Division/OnePass Integration Pattern for Non-Customer Facing (brackets async) Services. So in other words, it's a way for us to have asynchronous communication with the division. So us pushing content out to the divisions, which is really important because OnePass is not a standalone offering. It integrates very closely with the divisional channels as well. So we've got to be able to push information out to those divisions. So one of the trade-offs we had to make was for day one launch, there just wasn't a use case for this that stood out. So we didn't go around building the underlying infrastructure for that. Now what that means is that later on when those use cases do emerge and become concrete, you've then got to go back and do the underlying infrastructure work to be able to support that. So again, kind of solution diagrams. This is, don't worry too much about the details. Essentially, where we're heading to is using gRPC to be able to do that asynchronous communication. So the division on the right, it's all kind of numbered. Basically, events come in, it gets pushed into Kafka. There's a filter service which decides whether you should be able to see that event or not, pushes that back onto Kafka, which then gets consumed by the bridge, and then that gets pushed out to the appropriate division. So there's a little bit more detail than this. Again, I've simplified it a bit. But as you can imagine, building all this out, the filter service and the bridge and so on does take time. So there is definitely a trade-off that you need to make when you're thinking about both the short term and the long term, because the long-term solution is great and we're building it, it's there. The short term means that sometimes you just got to say, well, we need to get something done, and it can push you into a tactical solution. So the key thing we've had to do is balance that and make sure both we're getting the customer benefit, but that we're not So just in summary, I suppose, talking through OnePass, speed to market was a big consideration for us. That loosely coupled architecture and working within divisions who have different technical stacks was a key consideration. Thinking about it as a software as a service platform and how you document that, and almost to Alison's point around product thinking around your platforms has been really important for us. End-to-end testing using Pact has been really impactful for us, excuse the pun, and also with thinking about trade-offs, so that short-term versus long-term as you're building something like this. That was all I had to share with you. We're also hiring. I'm sure everyone here says that, so you got that. QR codes, don't need to type it in. And yeah, if you want to follow me on LinkedIn, I don't know why you bother, but if you do, that's my LinkedIn profile there as well. Any questions?
Okay, thank you, Andy. So I do tell the vendors not to do product pitches. I'll have to tell you guys not to do hiring pitches either.
Oh, we've got to squeeze it in.
That's fine. Any questions? Yes, over there. Let me grab the mic for you.
How closely did OneDigital work with the divisions to build out the integration with OneDigital?
So the question was, how closely did we work with the divisions to build out the integration? So yeah, good question. So in terms of our governance structure, we've worked very closely with the divisions. So we have an architecture working group, architecture review board, and all the divisions are represented on that. So as we're going through these decisions, we're eliciting that from all the divisions, both those who are the launch partners and future partners.
Yeah, just 1 second.
Saved. Okay, so you have this interesting organisation. You have divisions that have autonomy. Your software or your platform or your part of the business is an enabler of others. How exactly are you measuring the success? I think this is true of a lot of API platforms. What's the success criteria of OnePass?
Yeah, look, it's a great question. So as you'd expect, we are, as a division, we have a P&L, so we do get, there is a revenue aspect to that around subscribers. But we are two things. We're both a enabler for our customers to be able to interact with us, but we're also an enabler for the divisions to be able to uplift their businesses as well. So we've worked very hard with our data teams on incrementality and how do you track back, when somebody uses OnePass, is that something they would have just bought anyway? Is that something new? And without saying too much about the results, so far we've had very good results in terms of the ability for people to surface things, look at new products which they might not have been, they might not have come to us before. But yeah, it is a really key question. I've just come out of the back of 2 days of a leadership conference, and a lot of the questions were, how do we measure data? How do we measure digital? Because it is an investment, right? And as a business which is very performance focused, and we are very proud of that as a business, digital is an investment, and we do need to make sure we can show the results.
Great question. Yes, I've got to run all the way over there. This is my exercise.
So I had a look at your principles. The first two are, I see this a lot, they're actually opposite to each other. You've got one saying we want autonomy, and the second one is let's use existing capabilities, which is always an interesting one because everyone's like, well, once again, you can't be different, but you need to use this. How did you battle that? Did you actually get autonomy from using existing? Did Kmart come and say, mate, we've done this before, we've got business events, just use what we've got, just plug it in and you can own it? What really happened?
Yeah, so reusing capability, there's a number of ways you can do that, right? So as a group, we've got lots of common vendors. From a very base level, you can talk to the same vendor and get a better price, right? You can move up and you can say, we'll use the same platform and we'll be able to share knowledge and learning. you can get to, we're actually using the same instance of it, and there's kind of cost out there potentially. So we look at all of those, and not everyone is appropriate for every situation. What's most important is that we don't just kind of go off in completely different directions, that we are talking to each other. Autonomy doesn't mean, again, to borrow from Alison, aligned autonomy, right? So if the rest of the business is all using one particular identity platform, you've got to have a pretty good reason to not use the same platform.
Great. Okay, I'm afraid we're going to have to move on. Thank you, Anne.